Star Walker Studios presents Game Master's Journey, your multi-dimensional RPG podcast. Hello, fellow gamer. Welcome to episode 235 of Game Master's Journey. I'm your host, Lex Starwalker. On this show, we discuss the craft and the art of game mastering. I've been running RPGs for over 26 years now, and I produce this show in the hopes that you can benefit from my experience, my triumphs, and my mistakes. I have a great episode in store for you today. I'm going to be returning to the Dungeon Master's Guide, returning to our discussion of adventure environments. And today we're going to talk about settlements, and then we're going to talk about unusual adventure environments, including underwater, on the sea, and in the sky. So lots of great stuff in that discussion, and we're making our way through Chapter 5 of the Dungeon Master's Guide. I think the next episode in this series, we will conclude Chapter 5, and in that episode, we'll be talking all about traps. Then to round out the show later, after our DMG discussion, I'm going to talk about some listener feedback I got quite a while ago that I've been waiting to bring into the show about alignment. So we'll talk a little bit about alignment at the end of the show. But before we get into all that good stuff, I want to remind you that Game Master's Journey now has a community on MeWe, and this is replacing our Google Plus community because Google is shutting down Google Plus this next summer. So we're trying to get ahead of the game and get everyone over on MeWe so that when Google Plus goes bye-bye, we don't lose anyone. This is also replacing the forum and the subreddit that no one's been using for a long time anyway. So if you don't know anything about MeWe, it's a social media platform similar to Google Plus or Facebook. The key differences being that they don't advertise to you, and they don't track what you're doing online, and they don't collect and sell your data to anyone. They make their money by selling features, premium features like double encryption on text chats and more emoticons and stuff like that. But you can totally use it for free without having to pay anything and get the full experience, which is how I use it. There are plenty of emoticons that you get for free if you don't want to pay for it. But personally, I'd much rather use a service like that that's very upfront about how they're making their money and is something that you can choose to participate in or not, as opposed to something like Facebook that tracks everything you do online and sells it to who knows who. So yeah, definitely better to use something where you can have some security and you don't have to be constantly using a VPN just to use your social media. Check us out on MeWe. We've got quite a few people on there already, and that will be the home of the Game Master's Journey community going forward. I want to thank everyone for the fantastic feedback I've been getting for the episodes for season 13. And again, remind you there is some room later in the season for additional topics. So if you have a question about RPGs or GMing, or if you have a topic you think would be a good topic to discuss on the show, let me know. You can shoot me an email at gamemastersjourney@gmail.com or shoot me a message in our community on MeWe. So I want to thank you very much for joining me on the GM journey today. And without further ado, let's progress into the Dungeon Master's Guide. Once again, we are digging into the Dungeon Master's Guide for 5th edition D&D. This is a continuation of my deep dive into the Dungeon Master's Guide. We're resuming our discussion of Chapter 5 today. Chapter 5 is Adventure Environments. And in previous episodes, we talked about dungeons as adventure environments and the wilderness as an adventure environment. And today, we're talking about settlements. So if you're new to the show or you're new to this series, You can go to the show notes for this episode at starwalkerstudios.com, and there I have linked all of the previous episodes in the series in which I've been discussing the Dungeon Master's Guide, as well as the series of episodes I did on the Player's Handbook. So I've been going through the Dungeon Master's Guide page by page. We started at chapter 1. Well, actually, we started with the introduction, and we've gotten into chapter 5 now. And today I'm starting on page 112. But if you'd like to get caught up or refresh on other aspects of the DMG or the PHB, check the show notes, starwalkerstudios.com. You can see links to all of the previous episodes of this series in which I covered the DMG and the Player's Handbook. So check those out, please, and thank you. A village, town, or city makes an excellent backdrop for an adventure. The adventurers might be called on to track down a criminal who's gone into hiding, solve a murder, take out a gang of were-rats or doppelgangers, or protect a settlement under siege. When creating a settlement for your campaign, focus on the locations that are most relevant to the adventure. Don't worry about naming every street and identifying the inhabitants of every building. That way lies madness. So following, we have a whole set of tables that I find extremely useful for generating random settlements. So we have a whole bunch of tables here that will help you not only generate an overview of your settlement randomly, but also drill down into individual buildings and things within that settlement. Now, I always feel like I have to give a caveat anytime we start talking about tables, especially tables in the Dungeon Master's Guide, just so that we're all on the same page here as far as how we're going to use these tables. There are a lot of ways you can use these tables. And as a GM or the DM, you get to do whatever you want. Okay. These books that we read from are just guidelines, right? You don't have to live your life by these books. You can do what you want. It's your game. All right. So these tables, you can use them however you want. Don't feel like you have to roll a die and do what that die tells you to do. You don't. That's just one way to use the tables. You could just use these tables as inspiration and just pick whatever looks good from the table, or just read the table and maybe you get your own idea of something that's not on the table that you want to do. You can do that. You could roll on the table and you could use that result or not as you choose. However you want to use these tables, it's all good. You know, and again, you're not going to necessarily do it the same way all the time. You know, sometimes I'll roll on a table and I just use what I roll. And sometimes it can be fun as kind of an exercise to use whatever you rolled, even if it doesn't immediately seem like a good thing or something that fits really well. Sometimes trying to figure out how to use that weird thing you just rolled up can take you to interesting places that you might not have arrived at otherwise. Or sometimes you just re-roll, or sometimes you just pick something. Whatever you want to do, you're the DM. There's no rules here. There's no such thing as cheating. If you pick something from a table instead of rolling it, you're not cheating. It's whatever's going to make your game better for you and your players. Do that. Don't worry about it. So me personally, sometimes I might roll on these tables, but more often I will probably just pick what looks good to me from it, or use these tables as inspiration to come up with my own things. So following are tables that allow you to quickly create a settlement. They assume that you've already determined its size and its basic form of government. Okay, which is, I believe we discussed that a long time ago in one of the previous chapters about the different types of government and different sizes settlements can be. So again, you can go to the show notes and find all the previous episodes in the series if you want to check that out. So our first table here is race relations. So this is how well do the various races in your settlement get along, or a better way to say it is the various species. So you might have humans and elves and dwarves and half-orcs or whatever. How well do they all get along? So we have things ranging from harmony to tension or rivalry to a racial minority that are refugees, or a racial minority that are the rulers, or a racial minority that oppresses the majority, or a racial majority that oppresses the minority. We have different choices here. And again, you could generate a settlement randomly, and that'd be fun to do, just see what comes up if you just do all this randomly. Or you can use this at, kind of as a framing device or to get yourself thinking about racial relations, because it might not be something you'd think about otherwise. I probably honestly wouldn't necessarily think of that. But this, prompts you to think about, well, do all the races in this town get along? Or, is there one that kind of has all the power and another that doesn't? Or what, what are the dynamics of these different relationships? Next, we have ruler status. So, what do people think of whoever rules over them? We've got respected, fair, and just, a feared tyrant, a weakling manipulated by others, a religious leader, an illegitimate leader, a mysterious anonymous cabal. So lots of great ideas here to think about whoever's in charge of this settlement, what's going on with them. Next, we have notable traits. So this would be something that makes a settlement unique, like canals in place of streets, or a massive statue or monument, or a population that's mostly wealthy, or a population that's destitute and run down. Maybe there's an awful smell from tanneries or open sewers. Maybe it's a center of trade for one specific good. Maybe it has a notable library or academy, or it's a site of an important tomb or graveyard, or built atop ancient ruins. So lots of ideas here in this table of something unique about this place, something that makes it stand out. Next, we have a table called known for its ... So maybe this place is known for its delicious cuisine, or its rude people, or its tough warriors, or its dark magic, or its decadence, or its piety, or it's gambling, godlessness, wines, high fashion, all kinds of stuff. So, this can help you bring some flavor into the settlement. When people speak of this place and other places, what do they talk about? Current calamity. So this is something currently going on in the settlement. Maybe there's a suspected vampire infestation. Maybe a new cult needs converts. Maybe an important figure recently died, maybe murdered. Maybe there's an economic depression or flooding, or maybe the undead are stirring in the cemeteries, or a prophecy of doom. So a lot of these, or all of them really, these current calamities can be adventure hooks. So this is something going on in this settlement that the players could get involved in if they choose. So next, now that we've kind of fleshed out some interesting facts about our settlement using these random settlements tables, now we can start thinking about some of the buildings in the settlement, and we've got tables for that. Pulse-pounding chases and harrowing escapes within the confines of a town or city can sometimes force characters to dash into buildings. When you need to flesh out a building quickly, roll on the building type table. Then roll on the table corresponding to that building to add further detail. If a roll makes no sense considering where the characters are, such as a lavish mansion in a rundown part of town, you can always roll again or simply choose another result. However, such unexpected results can prompt creativity and memorable locations that help make your urban encounters distinct. So yeah, and this is really great. So we start out with a table building type, and then depending on the building type, we have different tables for each of those types. Now, as with all tables in the DMG, there's a lot of great ways you can use these. As is suggested here, you can use this during play if player characters go into a building in your city or whatever that you hadn't planned for or haven't thought about before. You can use these tables to quickly come up with something on the fly. You can also use these during prep, which is more often how I use them. As I'm preparing, fleshing out a town or something, I can use these tables to give me ideas of the kinds of things that might be in there that I might overlook or not think of otherwise, and use these tables to help me flesh those things out. So however you want to use them is good. And that's the thing I love about so many of these tables in the DMG is you can use them in preparation for a game, and you can also use them during the game when you need them. For instance, the player characters run into a building you didn't anticipate, and you're not sure what to do with that building. Take a 5-minute break. Everybody can, go to the bathroom and refill their drinks, and you can quickly flesh out that building using these tables. All right, so we start with building type. We have residence, religious, tavern, warehouse, and shop. And each of these have their own table that you then roll on. So we'll start with a residence. So it could be an abandoned squat, middle-class home, upper-class home, crowded tenement, orphanage, hidden slaver's den, front for a secret cult, or a lavish guarded mansion. Religious building, we've got temple to a good or neutral deity, temple to a false deity run by charlatan priests, a home of ascetics, an abandoned shrine, a library dedicated to religious study, or a hidden shrine to a fiend or an evil deity. Taverns are fun, right? We could have a quiet, low-key bar, a raucous dive, a thieves' guild hangout, a gathering place for a secret society, an upper-class dining club, a gambling den, a tavern that caters to a specific race or guild, or a members-only club, or a brothel. And another thing that I love here, under the tavern table, all the different types of taverns it might be, we also have a tavern name generator. And all of these names take the form of an adjective and a noun, or as they put it, a first part and a second part. So you've got two columns on this table, the adjective column and the noun column, and you can generate all kinds of random tavern names like the Laughing Pegasus or the Howling Stag or whatever. Yeah, really cool. And again, you could just generate tavern names from this table directly, really quickly and easily, or you could use this to inspire your own tavern names using words not on this table. Next, we have the warehouse table. Lots of different kinds of warehouses you could have. Empty or abandoned warehouse, heavily guarded warehouse full of expensive goods, a warehouse full of cheap goods, a warehouse full of bulk goods, a warehouse full of live animals, a warehouse full of weapons or armor, a warehouse with goods from a distant land, or a secret smuggler's den. And then we have a table for shops, all kinds of shops we could have in our settlement. And there's lots more besides these, but we could have a pawn shop, herbs or incense shop, fruits and vegetable shop, dried meats, pottery, undertaker, books, moneylender, weapons and armor, a chandler, which makes candles, a smithy, carpenter, a weaver, a jeweler, a baker, a map maker, a tailor, a rope maker, a mason, or a scribe shop. And again, I'm sure we could come up with more examples, but right there's 20 to get you started for all the different kinds of shops your settlement might have. All right, so, we've got our settlement. We've come up with some things about it. We've filled it with some interesting buildings. Now, you might want to take the next step and actually make a map of it. When you draw a map for a settlement in your game, don't worry about the placement of every building and concentrate instead on the major features. For a village, sketch out the roads, including trade routes leading beyond the village and roads that connect outlying farms to the village center. Note the location of the village center. If the adventurers visit specific places in the village, mark those spots on your map. So again, you're kind of coming up with stuff as you need it, right? So maybe before the adventure, you make this rough sketch of kind of the size and shape of the village, where the village center is, where the main streets are, and the roads that leave town and which direction those head. And you might have the inn and or the tavern, and maybe that's it. And then as the characters explore, maybe they're like, hey, we want to go. Is there a blacksmith in town? And you're like, of course there's a blacksmith in town. Well, we want to go there and talk to the blacksmith. Well, then you figure out where the blacksmith is and add that to your map as you go. Great way to do it. For towns and cities, note major roads and waterways, as well as surrounding terrain. Outline the walls and mark the locations of features you know will be important. Things like the Lord's Keep, significant temples, and I'd say an inn where the player characters will probably stay, or if the player characters live there, their homes, tavern where they're going to hang out, that kind of stuff. For cities, add internal walls and think about the personality of each ward or district of the city. Give the wards names reflecting their personalities, which also identify the kinds of traits that dominate the neighborhood. For example, Tannery Square or Temple Row, or a geographical characteristic like Hilltop or Riverside, or a dominant site like the Lord's Quarter. So we've got our settlement, we've fleshed it out a bit, maybe we've mapped it, and now we can think about encounters that can happen within our settlement. Although they hold the promise of safety, cities and towns can be just as dangerous as the darkest dungeon. Evil hides in plain sight or in dark corners. Sewers, shadowy alleys, slums, smoke-filled taverns, dilapidated tenements, and crowded marketplaces can quickly turn into battlegrounds. On top of that, adventurers must learn to behave themselves lest they attract unwanted attention from the local authorities. That said, characters who don't go looking for trouble can take advantage of all the benefits that a settlement has to offer. Law and order. Whether a settlement has a police force depends on its size and nature. A lawful, orderly city might have a city watch to maintain order and a trained militia to defend its walls, and a frontier town might rely on adventurers or its citizenry to apprehend criminals and fend off attackers. Trials. In most settlements, trials are overseen by magistrates or local lords. Some trials are argued, with the conflicting parties or their advocates presenting precedent and evidence until the judge makes a decision, with or without the aid of spells or interrogation. Other trials are decided with a trial by ordeal or trial by combat. If the evidence against the accused is overwhelming, a magistrate or local lord can forgo a trial and skip right to the sentencing. Sentences. A settlement might have a jail to hold accused criminals awaiting trial, but few settlements have prisons to incarcerate convicted criminals. A person found guilty of a crime is usually fined, condemned to forced labor for a period of several months or years, exiled, or executed, depending on the magnitude of the crime. So, there's something to think about and keep in mind. If the player characters run afoul of the law, or maybe an NPC does, and it's going to happen on stage, they're probably not going to be put in jail like what we think of in the modern day. That wasn't really a thing back then. But they might be fined, they might be condemned to forced labor, or exiled, or executed. All things to consider. Next, we have a section on random urban encounters. So random encounters can occur in your settlement as well. And they give us a random urban encounters table. So this table is useful for city and town-based adventures. Check for a random encounter at least once per day and once at night if the characters are out and about. Reroll the result if it doesn't make sense given the time of day. So we've got a bunch of stuff on this table, and it's pretty nice because they give an explanation for each of the things on the table. So we'll just hit a few of them here. Animals on the loose. The characters see one or more unexpected animals loose in the street. This challenge could be anything from a pack of baboons to an escaped circus bear, tiger, or elephant. It could be something fantastic too, right? Like maybe someone brought a dragon into town or something. I don't know. Brawl. A brawl erupts near the adventurers. It could be a tavern brawl, a battle between rival factions, families, or gangs in the city, or a struggle between city guards and criminals. The characters could be witnesses, hit by stray arrow fire, or mistaken for members of one group and attacked by the other. Maybe a companion. One or more characters are approached by a local who takes a friendly interest in the party's activities. As a twist, the would-be companion might be a spy sent to gather information on the adventurers. Could be a draft. The characters are drafted by a member of the city or town watch who needs their help to deal with an immediate problem. Adventure hook! As a twist, the member of the watch might be a disguised criminal trying to lure the party into an ambush. There you go. A drunk. A tipsy drunk staggers toward a random party member, mistaking him or her for someone else. Fire. A fire breaks out and characters have a chance to help put out the flames before it spreads. Found trinket. The characters find a random trinket. Use the trinket table in the player's handbook. Guard harassment. The characters are cornered by 1d4 plus 1 guards eager to throw their weight around. If threatened, the guards call out for help and might attract the attention of other guards or citizens nearby. Runaway cart. A team of horses pulling a wagon races through the city streets. The adventurers must avoid the horses. If they stop the wagon, the owner, who is running behind the cart, is grateful. Urchin. A street urchin gloms onto the characters and follows them around until frightened off. All right, so that's what we're given for settlements as far as adventure environments in the DMG. And I guess that's all I have to say about that. So next we'll go into unusual environments, which, let's face it, in a fantasy game, we're probably going to run into these quite a bit. So traveling through the wilderness doesn't always mean an overland trek. Adventurers might ply the open sea in a caravel or an elemental-powered galleon, soar through the air on hippogriffs or a carpet of flying, or ride giant seahorses to coral palaces deep beneath the sea. So we'll start out with underwater as an unusual environment. And, I don't want to spend a ton of time on this because you're not going to use this a whole lot probably. But if you ever need to, it's useful information to have. So we have a random undersea encounters table that you can use to inspire your creativity about things that characters might encounter underwater. Things like a sunken ship or sharks or a bed of giant oysters, including pearls within them for some treasure. Steam vents, sunken ruins, different creatures like seahorses or merfolk or sea hags they might encounter, things like that. One thing nice to know about if you're going to be underwater is how swimming works in the game. So unless aided by magic, a character can't swim for a full 8 hours per day. That makes sense. After each hour of swimming, a character must succeed on a DC 10 Constitution saving throw or gain 1 level of exhaustion. A character that has a swimming speed, including a character with a ring of swimming or similar magic, can swim all day without penalty and uses the normal force march rules in the player's handbook. So if you have a swim speed, either because of your race or a magic item, you just act as if you were walking and use the regular rules for force marching. If, however, you don't have a swim speed, then you use these rules where after each hour, you have to make a DC 10 Constitution saving throw or get a level of exhaustion. Swimming through deep water is similar to traveling at high altitudes because the water's pressure and cold temperature. For a creature without a swim speed, each hour spent swimming at a depth greater than 100 feet counts as 2 hours for the purpose of determining exhaustion. Swimming for an hour at a depth greater than 200 feet counts as 4 hours. So basically, the way I would approach this is I'd say if you're between 100 and 200 feet, you're going to be making those checks for exhaustion every half hour instead of every hour. And if you're at greater than 200 feet, you're going to be making those checks every 15 minutes instead of every hour. Underwater visibility. Visibility underwater depends on water clarity and the available light. Unless the characters have light sources, use the underwater encounter distance table to determine the distance at which characters underwater become aware of a possible encounter. We have here an underwater encounter distance chart. So this underwater encounter distance chart basically gives you an idea of how far you could see. If you can't see something, you can't really have an encounter with it, right? So in clear water with bright light, the encounter distance is 60 feet, which means you can see well out to 60 feet. You could see something that far away and, quote, encounter it. With clear water and dim light, encounter distance is only 30 feet. And with murky water or no light, encounter distance is 10 feet. So now we have some discussion of the sea. Characters can row a boat for 8 hours per day, or can row longer using the force march rules and risking exhaustion. A fully crewed sailing vessel, on the other hand, can sail all day, assuming its sailors work in shifts. Navigation. Seagoing vessels stay close to shore when they can, because navigation is easier when landmarks are visible. As long as a ship is within sight of land, there is no chance of the vessel becoming lost. Otherwise, a ship's navigator must rely on dead reckoning, which is tracking the direction and distance of the ship's travel, or use the sun and the stars. Use the wilderness navigation table earlier in this chapter to determine whether a ship veers off course. And then we have a random encounter table for encounters at sea. We have a little side box here on shipwrecks. A shipwreck is a plot device that can be used sparingly to great effect, particularly if you want the characters to be washed ashore on some monster-infested island, or, in the case of an airship, dropped in the middle of some exotic land. There aren't rules for determining when a shipwreck happens. It happens when you, the GM, want it or need it to happen. Even the strongest seafaring ship can founder in a storm, run aground on rocks or reefs, sink during a pirate attack, or be dragged underwater by a sea monster. A storm or hungry dragon can lay waste to an airship just as easily. A shipwreck has the potential to change the direction of a campaign. It isn't, however, a particularly good way to kill off characters or end a campaign. And that mainly is because, like they said, it happens when you say it happens. So ending a campaign or killing off a player character, just saying it happens, isn't always the greatest way to do things. It's usually better to have mechanics around that, so it doesn't just feel like the DM just decided to kill your character, right? If you and your campaign conspire to wreck a ship on which the characters are traveling, it is assumed that the characters survive with the equipment they are wearing or carrying still in their possession. The fate of any NPCs and cargo aboard the wrecked ship is entirely up to you, and I'd say this is all entirely up to you. See, this, despite the fact that the folks at Wizards tell us again and again that these rules are just guidelines and you, the GM, are free to run the game how you want, they still occasionally try to insinuate their own ideas of how you should do that on you. And this is one of those instances where they're saying, if you and your campaign conspire to wreck a ship on which the characters are traveling, it is assumed by Wizards of the Coast that the characters survive with the equipment they are wearing or carrying still in their possession. So they're very subtly there trying to tell you that they think that's what you should do. But of course, you can do whatever you want because you're the GM. Just reminding you. They get tricky like that sometimes. All right, so we have a random encounters at sea table. You can check that out. Weather at sea. Use the weather table earlier in this chapter that we talked about before for checking for weather at sea. If weather conditions indicate both a strong wind and heavy rain, they combine to create a storm with high waves. A crew caught in a storm loses sight of all landmarks unless there's a lighthouse or other bright feature, and ability checks made to navigate during the storm have disadvantage. In a dead calm, which means no wind, ships can't move under sail and must be rowed. A ship sailing against a strong wind moves at half speed. All right, then we have a bit of discussion on visibility. On a relatively calm sea, there's great visibility. From a crow's nest, a lookout can spot another ship or a coastline up to 10 miles away, assuming clear skies. Overcast skies reduce that distance by half. Rain and fog reduce visibility just as they do on land. You know, this is a little paragraph I wish I would have known about months ago when I was trying to figure out how far a ship on the sea could see, and spent a bunch of time online going down rabbit holes trying to figure that out. And don't know how real world accurate this little guideline here is of saying they can see 10 miles, but I'd be happy to use it as opposed to spending an hour trying to research it and getting no clear answer. All right, next we have a section on owning a ship. At some point in your campaign, the adventurers might gain custody of a ship. They might purchase or capture one or receive one to carry out a mission. It's up to you whether a ship is available for purchase, and you have the power to deprive the adventurers of a ship at any time should it become a nuisance. And for one way to do that, we just talked about shipwrecks. Crew. A ship needs a crew of skilled hirelings to function. As per the player's handbook, one skilled hireling costs at least 2 gold pieces per day. The minimum number of skilled hirelings needed to crew a ship depends on the type of vessel as shown in the airborne and waterborne vehicles table, which has a few ships on it and tells you how much crew each ship needs. You can track the loyalty of individual crew members or the crew as a whole using the optional loyalty rules in Chapter 4, which we discussed extensively in a previous episode. If at least half the crew becomes disloyal during a voyage, the crew turns hostile and stages a mutiny. If the ship is berthed, disloyal crew members leave the ship and never return. Passengers. The table indicates the number of small and medium passengers the ship can accommodate. Accommodations consist of shared hammocks and tight quarters. A ship outfitted with private accommodations can carry 1/5 as many passengers. A passenger is usually expected to pay 5 silver pieces per day for a hammock, but prices can vary from ship to ship. A small private cabin usually costs 2 gold pieces per day. So this is useful information if your player characters are going to book passage on a ship. This tells you what to charge them. Damage threshold. A ship has immunity to all damage unless it takes an amount of damage equal to or greater than its damage threshold, in which case it takes damage as normal. Any damage that fails to meet or exceed the damage threshold is considered superficial and doesn't reduce the ship's hit points. Ship repair. Repairs to a damaged ship can be made while the vessel is berthed. Repairing 1 hit point of damage requires 1 day and costs 20 gold pieces for materials and labor. We also have a table here of airborne and waterborne vehicles. We've got the airship, galley, keelboat, longship, rowboat, sailing ship, and warship. And it gives a cost for all those, what their speed is, crew requirement, number of passengers they can carry, cargo they can carry in tons, armor class hit points, and damage threshold. Then we have a discussion of the sky. So flying characters can move from one place or another in a relatively straight line, ignoring terrain and monsters that can't fly or that lack long-range attacks. Flying by spell or magic item works the same as travel on foot, as described in the player's handbook. A creature that serves as a flying mount must rest 1 hour for every 3 hours it flies, and it can't fly for more than 9 hours per day. Thus, characters mounted on griffins, which have a flying speed of 80 feet, can travel at 8 miles per hour, covering 72 miles over 9 hours with 2 1-hour-long rests over the course of the day. Mounts that don't tire, such as a flying construct or like a flying carpet, aren't subject to this limitation. So that's an interesting thing to know. As adventurers travel through the air, check for random encounters as you normally would. Ignore any result that indicates a non-flying monster unless the characters are flying close enough to the ground to be targeted by non-flying creatures making ranged attacks. Characters have normal chances to spot creatures on the ground and can decide whether or not to engage them. So there we have some ideas and guidelines for 2 more fantastic or unusual environments that your adventures can take place, either on or under the water or up in the skies. And I think that gives you a good place to start. And, going over this myself, I'd forgotten that it had the information in here about owning a ship and dealing with that, which is really useful because that's something I may be using in the not so distant future in my campaign. So let me know what you think about these, quote, unusual environments of the sea or underwater and in the sky. How often have you used these in your games? And what were your experiences? Did you find these environments to be fun places to adventure and have a change of pace? Did you use some of these ideas and systems from the DMG? And if so, how'd they work out for you? I'd love to hear your thoughts. GameMastersJourney@gmail.com.
This is Matthew Colville, and you're listening to Game Master's Journey.
All right, so we have a little extra time today. So I have a voicemail that I received from a listener a long time ago. He goes by the Lego Guy, and he had some really interesting thoughts about alignment. I've talked about alignment quite a bit on the show in previous episodes, and I believe he's responding to a specific episode in which I talked about it a bit. But I've been wanting to respond to this voicemail. I really love when I get voicemails and bringing someone else's voice on the show other than my own. So let's hear what the Lego guy has to say, and I may jump in here and there to give my own comments on what he's talking about here.
Hey, Lex, it's the Lego guy again. I was listening to episode 127, Adventuring the Wilds Primordia, and you tossed out the idea of getting rid of alignments, not the idea, the assertion that you're getting rid of alignments, and I gotta say that really hits home. I sat down a while ago and made an alignment chart, like a very visual alignment chart that just, laid out, in the 9-square grid of like the classic D&D alignments, various, I guess you'd say, famous characters in fiction, from all over fiction, all the way from the Dark Tower all the way to Disney characters, and it was like a fun chart to make. But then, like, after I made it and looked at it, I found myself taking characters like Walter White in particular, and finding that I could put him in various stages of his dramatic arc as, all the way from neutral to chaotic evil, and occasionally even seeing him in lawful categories too.
Yeah, so let me hit pause right there and just respond to this first bit here. I don't remember exactly what I was saying that the Lego guy is responding to here, but I do know kind of my opinions about alignment in general, so I can kind of guess what kinds of things I was probably saying that he's talking about here. And yeah, alignment is a strange thing. I mean, for one thing, you don't really see it in many games other than D&D, and the games that you do see something like alignment in tend to be kind of D&D clones or games that are, like D&D. But beyond that, you really don't see it. I'm trying to think other games I've played, if I've ever seen anything remotely like alignment in another game. And really the only thing I can think of that comes even close is, for instance, in the World of Darkness games by White Wolf, they had something like it. Like, for instance, in Vampire, you had humanity, which was sort of like alignment in that it represented your morality, but it was more it wasn't like there were different alignments. It was just a scale going from 10, which was you are more human than most humans, which means you feel guilty about lying to someone or stealing something, all the way down to a 1 humanity where you could commit the most atrocious crimes, torture, murder, things like that, and not have any pangs of conscience at all. And then at a 0 humanity, you were like an animal at that point. So it was more a mechanic and an illustration of a descent from humanity into being a monster. It wasn't really alignment in the D&D sense. And the only other game I can think of would be various iterations of Star Wars role-playing games that I've played, which would have a similar thing in reflecting the possibility of falling to the dark side, especially if you were a Jedi or some other Force user. And was very similar to the vampire example I just gave, where it's kind of going from less evil to more evil kind of thing. But I can't recall any game I've ever played that wasn't just a D&D clone that had anything like the concept of alignment that we have in D&D, where we're going to try to label someone's morality very specifically. I mean, you think about it, alignment in D&D is pretty specific, right? We've got law versus chaos and neutral versus, good versus evil, and all the different permutations of that. So, when you first glance at that seems really specific and granular. And yet, like what the Lego guy is talking about here, it immediately breaks down as soon as you start to really think about it or analyze it or pick at it, which, yeah, it just doesn't hold up. Not only does it not hold up to real people in the real world, but as the Lego guy is getting to here, it doesn't even hold up to characters in fiction or fantasy fiction that we might think of. It can't even describe them accurately, much rather a real person, which leads me and many other people to wonder, what use is alignment? Is it even worth, thinking about or trying to learn this system? Does it really have any purpose or point or usefulness beyond, I don't know, like a grade school game where, we're like Disney levels of moral complexity where things are good or evil and there's nothing in between. Other than that, it seems like not terribly useful or applicable to me anyway. So personally, I think the two big flaws with the alignment system are, one, that it can't realistically describe a real interesting character. It can't realistically describe a living person. Any living person that you think of isn't going to fit in one of the alignments. It can't realistically describe even fictional characters from your favorite movie, your favorite TV show, your favorite book, unless you're talking about the most simplistic, two-dimensional, tertiary character in a story. If you're talking about any kind of developed character at all in any story, they're going to go way beyond the limits of alignment right away. Like it's not capable of describing those characters. And the other big flaw with it is it seems to assume that characters are static, that they're always the same, which is what the Lego guy is talking about here with Walter White. The very concept of having an alignment for your character carries with it the assumption that people have the same morality, not only their entire lives, but from day to day. That this character that you play every day is going to approach things the same way. And that's just not realistic or true, not only, again, for real people, but even for characters in stories. Because part of what makes a character interesting in a story is when that character has an arc. And a character without an arc isn't interesting. And often, or if not always, what makes a character interesting is their arc. And an arc is simply a journey, to put it metaphorically, that a character goes on. An arc is, where the character begins in a story and where they end up in the story. And the arc is how that character has changed, So let's take an example that hopefully everyone's familiar with. Let's talk about Star Wars: A New Hope, Episode 4. Luke Skywalker very definitely has an arc in that movie. He starts out, he's a farm boy living on this backwater planet of Tatooine. He's a moisture farmer. He literally farms water. He's a farm boy. I mean, he's very unsophisticated. Presumably, he's never been on another planet. He's never even been to probably another region of the planet he's on. He hasn't been exposed to much at all. He's heard about the Empire, but probably hasn't had much direct exposure to it, other than, whatever customs officials or whatever he might have encountered in Mos Eisley before or whatever. But he's very much, the country yokel, right? He doesn't know about the Force. He doesn't know about Jedi. He doesn't know anything about who his parents were. His biggest aspiration in life is to go to the academy, which is the Imperial Academy. He wants to go to the academy and become a pilot for the Empire. That's who Luke is at the beginning of the movie. By the end of the movie, he has learned about the Force. He's learned to trust in the Force and to use the Force. He's used the Force to give the killing blow to the Death Star. He's become part of the Rebel Alliance. By the end of the movie, he's given a medal by Princess Leia as part of the Rebel Alliance. And we see in the beginning of the next movie, Empire Strikes Back, that he actually has rank as a soldier in the Alliance. He's seen new places. He's seen the Death Star. He's been to Alderaan or what's left to it. He's been to Yavin 4. He's met new people. He's met, Han Solo, who's a smuggler, and his first mate, Chewbacca. He's met Princess Leia, who's one of the leaders of the rebellion. He's met Wedge Antilles, who's one of the pilots in the rebellion. He's his horizons have broadened greatly. He's become a hero. He helped rescue Princess Leia from the Empire on the Death Star. He's had all these adventures. He's grown and changed as a person. And not only does he no longer want to join the Empire and be a pilot for them, but he's joined their enemy, the Rebellion, and he's begun the path of becoming a Jedi, which, you know, if there's anything more against everything the Empire stands for than the Jedi, I don't know what it is. So, you know, I'm not going to sit here and try to figure out what alignment Luke would be at different points in the movie, because it's kind of a pointless exercise, because alignment is just really not relevant to anything outside of D&D and just breaks down. So why even bother? But I think that we could see, without going through that pointless exercise, that if we were to give him alignments in the beginning and the end of the movie, they most likely would be different in some way. Or maybe they wouldn't be, which again would show a flaw in the system. The fact that the character could change so much, but his alignment isn't the same or is the same, doesn't make a lot of sense. So, you know, I don't think alignment is useful for describing real people. It's not useful for describing fictional people. The only arena in which it might be remotely or at all useful is describing a D&D character. And I don't think it's terribly useful for that either. So yeah, you know, Walter White is a great example of someone who, first of all, it would be hard to pin an alignment on him at any point. And second of all, like what the Lego guy is saying here, you could take Walter White in different scenes and say, oh, in this scene, he's this alignment. In this scene, he's this alignment. In that episode, he's this alignment. He changes, right? And it's not even necessarily a straight progression from, say, lawful good to chaotic evil. It's not a direct line from one to the other. I mean, he bounces around a lot. Another example I love to use is Jaime Lannister from Game of Thrones. What alignment is he? You know, it depends what episode you're talking about. It depends what scene you're talking about. And those are interesting, compelling characters. They are multi-dimensional characters. And just by giving your D&D character an alignment, you're taking a step away from a multi-dimensional character and taking a step towards a two-dimensional character, which generally speaking is not what we want. All right. Anyway, enough of my rambling. Let's get back to the Lego guy's voicemail.
And then, you know, and then I thought back even farther on it, because I've been wanting to make this chart for a while. And I thought back, you know, to like what the actual purpose or the function of alignment in my game, and found myself like thinking, you know, that really the only use of alignment that I'd ever found satisfying was in like magic items. And like I had this thing called, I think it's called the Corvus Bell, that when you rung it, it would do, you know, a massive amount of damage to any character that wasn't in evil alignment. And it was like a you know, like a fun weapon to use, but I mean, really, even in gameplay, it felt arbitrary using it, even though it was fun. Besides that, the alignment thing was like, oh, like, be scared of this guy, you're evil, you know, or, you know, obviously, like, with Paladins, it's fun to be like, look out, you know, this guy is lawful good, he will do the right thing no matter what. But that being said, the flip side of it is that it seems like you're expecting too much from the players to you know, like not put the character in a category. And that's why I made the chart I talked about earlier in the first place, was so that people could, you know, fill out that slot. And I could just be like, all right, like, who do you see your character as? Do you see him like Malcolm Reynolds, or do you see him like...
Yeah, and I'm not sure what happened there. I lost the end of the Lego guy's message. I'm not sure if he got cut off on the voicemail, or if somehow in the editing process I deleted part of it and lost it. But I think where he was going from there was just talking about how, you know, if you just start taking characters from literature or from movies or comic books or whatever, and start trying to assign them to alignments, how, you know, you can run into a lot of problems, and people will argue. I mean, you see stuff on Twitter all the time, you know, people will assign alignments to different characters from, you know, books or movies or whatever. And people will argue about, oh no, I think this guy's chaotic good. No, I think he's neutral good. And just the fact that we can't even agree on what alignment certain characters are, to me, just points more fingers at the inherent flaws in the system. And yeah, I've had some of the same thoughts about, items, and really for the most part in 5th edition, that's about the only time that alignment really has any meaning in my game is, certain magic items might require a certain alignment to be used, or like what the Lego guy is talking about here, certain items might target certain alignments or something like that. But like he says, it's not terribly satisfying, and you find yourself really scratching your head as to what's really happening in world with this, because does it really make sense that this bomb that goes off somehow does more damage to people who are evil or good? What does that even mean? And yeah, that stuff falls apart almost immediately as soon as you start examining it, which is why I've gone back and forth with alignment just since 5th edition, not to mention all the years before that. And kind of where I'm at these days is I pretty much ignore it. Personally, I think the only possible value alignment has, perhaps, and I'm not even sold on this, but maybe if you're dealing with newer players, it might perhaps help them to arrive at some kind of a concept for their character in their head, or give them some kind of guideline as how to role play a character, assuming that they're not just going to play a character who's like themselves, which, in my experience, most people that I've played with that are new players, they just play a character who's basically them in the fantasy world. And I think that's where most people start, unless they're already actors or something like that. So, I mean, if you're doing that, you don't need alignment. You don't need to sit there and worry about, what alignment would I be? Just play your character how you would play your character. The only time I would think that alignment would be remotely useful is if you have a player that's just not sure what to do as far as how to play their character, their personality, their morals. Picking an alignment gives them somewhere to start from and some kind of framework to start building on. But even with that player, I think eventually they will outgrow that alignment and they will become dissatisfied with it, because their character hopefully will become more real in their mind and more nuanced, and the shoebox of alignment that they put them in will fit less and less as they play that character more. And in my mind, that's a good thing. So at best, I would say alignment is almost like training wheels, that, you use the training wheels if you have to, but the goal is always to get those training wheels off that bike as soon as possible, because really, once you know what you're doing, they just get in the way. And the more I think about it, the more I think that's a great analogy or metaphor for alignment. Alignment is training wheels. Can be useful if you need it, if you absolutely need it and can't get by without it. But as soon as you can get rid of it, you should, because it's just going to get in your way and make the whole thing not go as well, I think. So, yeah, I don't know. I don't find it useful at all, honestly. And I've found that it creates more problems than it solves. And I would bet money that the only reason we have alignment at all in 5th edition is just a legacy thing. They wanted 5th edition to appeal to all D&D gamers, and like it or not, alignment has been part of D&D since the very beginning. And a lot of people think it's part of what makes D&D D&D. So, I don't think Wizards was willing to take that step to take it out of the game completely, because they didn't want to alienate older players. Even though they kind of almost did take it out of the game completely. If you really look at it, there are very few instances where alignment has any mechanical bearing on the game. And those instances, at least to my knowledge, are entirely within the realm of magic items. I've talked before about, for instance, the Moonblade, which is an artifact, actually requires a good aligned character. And there are some artifacts and other powerful magic items that require certain alignments to be attuned to. And other than that, that's the only real mechanical application of alignment in 5th edition. Even previous things like the no alignment spell doesn't exist anymore. And the detect evil and detect good spells have been reworked into a spell. I believe it's called detect good and evil. And when you read that spell, actually the name of the spell is another legacy thing. They're calling it that because that's what it was called in the past. But that isn't actually what the spell does. When you read the description, the spell isn't detecting good or evil or alignment of any kind. It's detecting things that are extraplanar in origin, like fae and fiends and celestials and things like that. It's got nothing to do with alignment. So again, the only places I found in the rules where alignment has any bearing whatsoever is in certain magic items, and those are few and far between. And those items are all items that existed in previous edition. It's all legacy stuff. I haven't seen anything new created for 5th edition that involved alignment in a mechanical way. So as far as the rules are concerned, it doesn't matter what alignment you write down for your character. If you're playing a paladin, you don't have to be lawful good. So I think as a DM, it's very easy to just ignore alignment. And honestly, I think your game will be better off if you do ignore alignment. And, we definitely don't have in 5th edition any kind of penalties for changing alignment. In previous editions, you were expected to play your alignment and you would be punished if you didn't play your alignment. For instance, if you were playing a paladin and you weren't playing lawful good, you could lose your paladin abilities. And there were systems in place for changing alignment. And if the DM felt that your character had changed alignment, or if you decided your character had changed alignment, there were systems in place and penalties and drawbacks that you would incur. I think there are XP penalties and things like that in some of the earlier editions for changing your alignment, whether you were doing it voluntarily as, you were growing your character, or whether it was, coming from the DM who's saying, you say your guy's lawful good, but you're not playing lawful good. Change your alignment to lawful neutral or whatever. There were penalties associated with that. Like you would suffer some drawbacks for changing your alignment. It wasn't just like, oh, change your alignment, everything's good. Where now in 5th edition, there's really no mechanical anything that, if you come to the game and you tell your DM, hey, I know I wrote neutral good on my character, but I think he's really chaotic good. I mean, it's not going to make any difference. So then I ask the question, why even bother with it? It seems like a wasted blank on the character sheet, if you ask me. So Lego Guy, thank you so much for your thoughts on that. And yeah, if anyone else has thoughts on alignment, let me know. It'd be a fun topic to revisit in a future episode. All right, well, that's going to wrap it up for episode 235 of Game Master's Journey. If you'd like to get a hold of me, there are a lot of great ways you can do so. Shoot me an email at gamemastersjourney@gmail.com. Follow me on Twitter @LexStarWalker. You can also call our voicemail, 951-GMJLex1. That's 951-465-5391. Or just check the show notes if you didn't catch all those numbers flying by. Join our community on MeWe and Discord. And you can find links to all those great things in the show notes at starwalkerstudios.com/Game Master's Journey. If you have comments, questions, or feedback, I would love to hear from you. If you enjoy Game Master's Journey and you'd like to help support the show, you can find all the ways to do that at starwalkerstudios.com/support. I've even got some options for you that won't cost any money. The best way that you can help me out and support the show and my RPG endeavors is to check out my latest self-published D&D supplement, Relics of Power. You could also get yourself a Game Master's Journey t-shirt. However you decide to support the show, I really, really appreciate it. I hope that you have a chance to play your favorite RPG this week. I hope you have a chance to run your favorite RPG. I'll be back soon with another episode of Game Master's Journey. Until then, game on.
This has been a Starwalker Studios production, your source for quality gaming and hobby podcasts.
This episode's music, courtesy of Cloudwalker, Transboy, Renfield, Stanko, and Ish. See the show notes for more details at starwalkerstudios.com/Game Master's Journey.